So hey everyone, thank you so much for joining. My name is Rithwik Gupta. I am one of the TAs for the LSAT Unplugged course, and today I'll be your host for this interview. During the interview, if you have any questions you would like to ask our guests, please feel free to ask in the chat. With that said, it is my pleasure to welcome our guest tonight, Anne Levine. Anne Levine has been helping students gain admission into law school for 18 years. Her company is called Law School Expert, and she is the author of the Law School Admission Game, Play Like an Expert, now in its 4th edition. She can be found on Instagram and TikTok at Law School Expert. Thank you for joining us today, Anne.
Thanks so much for having me. It's funny to hear that find me on TikTok thing. That still sounds weird to me, but it's true.
Yeah. And before I get into some questions I prepared for tonight, I'd love for you to give a little bit of background to our audience tonight about who you are and what you do.
Sure, thank you. So I have been working in law school admissions pretty much since I graduated from law school 25 years ago. And I have spent more than 20 of those years helping applicants apply to law school. I started Law School Expert in 2004, so before some of my current clients were born, not quite, close. And I have been dedicating those 18 years to just full-time helping people through the application process. So people work one-on-one with me. I help them to make good decisions throughout the process, good strategic decisions for them, both about how they present themselves to the law school, where they apply, the choices they make about where to attend, et cetera. And I've written, as you mentioned, several books on the topic, and I've been blogging since like 2006, and now I don't even think blogging's still a thing, but I've written pretty extensively on it. And my approach is really being candid. I do believe in shooting for the stars, but I also believe in giving people very candid information, not sugarcoating things, so that they can make good decisions and they're not later disappointing their outcomes. So that a lot of my advice that you'll hear that we'll go through tonight will probably have that lens.
Gotcha. And kind of going back into that, kind of what made you decide to start Law School Expert? What was the kind of drive behind starting that? Because I know you were doing you were a director of admissions at LMU Law, as well as Case Western School of
California
Law.
Western, but yes.
California Western, sorry.
Yes. So my trajectory during law school was actually I had kind of two paths I was going on simultaneously. And one of them was a deep interest in higher education. I was very involved with school politics, and I actually went right from law school to working at the University of Denver College of Law. And I think the title was something like Director of Student Services. It's been a long time. But basically, I was the liaison between the students and the administration, which was a really fantastic role for a law school graduate. And I really got a lot out of that. And I worked very closely with admissions. My office was actually in the admissions office. I learned a lot about that there. And then I got the amazing opportunity to be a 26-year-old director of admissions at a law school. And it was fantastic. I learned so much. I just had people who trusted me, who met me, trusted me, chose me for a role. And I loved helping students succeed. But my job then was really to fill the class, right? That was really the lens through which my job was. And so I did that for several years. I worked at California Western, and then I was like 28, I was director of admissions at Loyola Law School, which at the time was one of the biggest law schools in the country. And it's a great law school. It's been around a long time. So it was great. And my personal life took me to Santa Barbara after that. And this is before the internet. I couldn't review applications online. There was no Zoom. So I practiced law for several years. And I mean, the long story short, and this is documented elsewhere in internet land, is I ended up not practicing law because I was fired from my job as a litigator for having the audacity to become a mother. So I've shared this story publicly. It seems a little far-fetched today's age, but unfortunately not that far-fetched. But when I had my first child, they said, oh, we don't, we feel you're going to mommy track it, and see you later. So I did some time soul searching, and what I came up with was this was what I really had loved, is working with people applying to law school. And I started the company kind of on a whim back in 2004, and it was just so well received. And I really loved working with people and helping them make smart decisions after seeing so many people do stupid things in their law school applications, and being on the other side and understanding what law schools really do value and how they balance their incoming classes, and what they're concerned about.
Yeah.
Both on an individual level, do they really care about your plagiarism from, your freshman year of college, or do they really care that you've had one DUI 5 years ago, 8 years ago? These kinds of things. So how they reflect on diversity, which has been really amazing to see that morph through the years. So I just took all of that, and that is all that I've done ever since.
Wow.
That's a really long-winded answer to your question.
No, yeah, that's a great answer. As someone who's trying to apply to law school in the upcoming cycle, I've done a lot of research on resources and stuff like that, and I have done a lot of research on you yourself. So for me to be interviewing you today, it's really exciting for me, and I'm really glad to have had the opportunity to talk to you.
I hope you'll fit in some of your personal questions to it as well, and get some of those
course,
answered.
yeah.
Feel free to ask anything.
Sounds good. So one of the first questions I had, kind of just getting into it, is that, and this is, I'm sure you've been asked this question a lot, is what are some of the common issues that students run to with their personal statement that you help them overcome?
It's a great question. I think broadly, people focus on the wrong things. They tell the story that they think someone else wants to hear rather than the story that's authentic to them. That would be number one. As an example of that would be someone writing about a legal issue they really care about, or something that happened to them as a child, or how they always spoke up for their baby brother, like things that they think sound cute, but don't reflect their current maturity levels and accomplishments and endeavors. But I think also just some common mistakes, and we can overlook the obvious, like errors, right? Or putting the wrong school's name in an essay, but thematic mistakes or tone mistakes, coming across as arrogant, coming across as insincere. I mean, law schools really do see through that. When you're reading hundreds of applications a week, you've got a pretty good BS meter. And so I think those are some of the things I really work with people to find what's the authentic story for them. Let's not worry about what someone else could write. Let's not worry about what you think the law schools want to hear about that one internship from 4 summers ago. Let's really talk about, it's okay to talk about a time you learned a lesson a hard way. It's okay to write about a struggle and how you came out of it. It's not everything has to be, oh, let me tell you about the time I solved a very important problem at my internship. I mean, how many of us really do that? So I think it's about really being authentic and telling your story, and using the personal statement is just one piece of the application. So if you've discussed something really beautifully on your resume, you don't have to do it again in your personal statement. And the personal statement should balance with everything else. If you know that you have your professor writing about your thesis, and then you're also writing about your thesis, just thinking about some of those things.
Yeah, that makes sense. A well said answer. I think a lot of students tend to, use their skills from when they applied to undergraduate, and they think that it's kind of the same process, but it really isn't, because, how many applicants are applying to law school versus students applying to undergraduate. And so when I can imagine when people are reading your application, they're really getting into it and really trying to figure out who you are as a person through your application.
I think more than that, I think even piggybacking what you said about it's different from college, I think most people feel they could have done the college admissions process better too. And I think a lot of people come to me because they don't want to make those same mistakes. They want to know that they're not leaving anything on the table this time around, that they felt a little shorted, or they felt like they didn't make smart decisions about where to apply. They didn't pick schools that were right for them. And they really want to make sure that with law school, they're approaching it more thoughtfully.
Gotcha. Okay, makes sense. And so there is also another question I know a lot of students tend to kind of ask, and that's in regards to writing addendums in regards to their LSAT score or GPA, and kind of understanding when it's appropriate to write one and when it's not appropriate to write one.
I love this question. And it's a great example. The LSAT addendum is a great example of how my opinion on this has morphed over the years based on trends. And reasons for that include the frequency the LSAT is given, how frequently you can take it now, There have been changes in
Mhm.
policies over how often you can take it. Sometimes it's been unlimited, sometimes it's been limited in different ways. Um, Also, the frequency of obtaining accommodations and other things have come into play that have altered my response to the do I write an LSAT addendum question. And I believe that people are explaining too much sometimes in their applications. Um, if I'm starting to hear about the third grandparent that's passed away, it's a little much. And
Mhm.
I feel like we need to be selective about what we choose to have reasons for it. Remember, you're creating an argument. So if you're trying to say that none of your LSAT scores are indicative of your academic potential, great, write that argument. But if you're trying to say that some of your LSAT scores aren't indicative, but one is, then you have to look at the order in which you took those LSATs. If it was a clear upward trajectory, that's pretty easy. And maybe you don't really have to explain it. If it's a 8-point jump or what have you between scores, and it's obviously increased preparation, what have you, the higher score does stand. Schools do not average LSAT scores, even though they see all of the LSAT scores. So especially if you're explaining 3 other things elsewhere in your application, I would go easy. I would put the brake pedal on an LSAT addendum. If you're trying to make the case that standardized tests generally are not good indicators of your academic abilities, and you can prove it by pointing to other things like your undergraduate grades, like your history with standardized testing prior to the LSAT, then that usually still would warrant an addendum. If you are already being accommodated for the issue that causes you to be less proficient at standardized tests, it gets more complicated. And then you have to start making an argument that you didn't get appropriate accommodations. And then you start to bring in this other thing like, oh, are you an argumentative person who's never going to be happy with what they're given? So there are certain things people have to be delicate about. So I'm less excited about LSAT addenda just given current policies, but
Mhm.
there are times when a compelling argument needs to be made, but you never need to apologize for a certain LSAT score, right? You never have to explain a cancellation ever. Or even multiple cancellations. I mean, that just is your judgment call to cancel the LSAT.
Mhm.
It's not something you have to explain to the law schools. With the GPA, it can be a little bit different. It can be, if it's obvious on your academic summary report that you have an upward trend, a very specific upward trend, and your only thing you're going to say is, yeah, freshman year I partied too much, I was adjusting to life without mom and dad, like, then I'd leave it out. But if you
Mhm.
have something weird like halfway through college or your senior year grades drop and you need to explain I had family responsibilities, or during I got sick with COVID, or what have you, then you should point out the reasons why that particular semester or term or year is not indicative of your potential. If you sought
Okay.
medical treatment for something and you were going through something, whether it's mental health issue or physical ailment, that you can explain to the law schools as well. Give just enough detail to be credible, but you don't feel you have to overshare with, your gory symptoms or what have you. I think law, what law students really do is they decide what facts are relevant and they make a
Mhm.
case. And this is what your law school exams are going to be. You're given a set of facts and you have to decide which facts are relevant. And that is
Yeah.
exactly what you're going to do in your law school application, especially with addenda.
Mhm. That makes sense. And kind of sidetracking from that, I know a lot of students tend to complain about the fact that they're concerned that their undergraduate school or college that they're currently attending is not ranked as high as some of the other schools like UCLA, and they try to overcompensate for that on their admission, or they're just overall just stressed about the fact that because of the fact that they came from a school that no one really knows, like law schools might frown upon that and kind of look the other way towards a student who did come from a school that is kind of more widely known, such as UCLA
Let
or
me debunk
Berkeley.
that for a moment. I'm going to debunk it right off the bat. I mean, I have someone
Okay.
right now who just been interviewed off the Harvard waitlist or is on the Harvard waitlist, who went to UC Merced. Okay.
Wow. Okay.
So let's debunk that. If I look at my people who are admitted to Harvard, they didn't all go to Princeton, Yale, and Dartmouth and Harvard.
Mhm.
Okay. I have people in the last couple of years, and this is just off the top of my head, who went to like Ohio State, University of Minnesota. Like, these are not things to really worry about if everything else in your application shows that you belong at Harvard, right? But
Gotcha.
if you also have a low LSAT, your grades
Mhm.
aren't amazing, your resume is nothing amazing, then yeah, I mean, where you got your undergraduate degree isn't really the issue. It
Mhm.
it won't hold you back if everything else is in line. I mean, I have two clients right now who have already been admitted to Harvard Law School for this cycle. One went to University of Miami, and which don't scoff at because that's where I went. And then one went to University of Iowa. So you know what? I believe in worrying about things that are within your control.
Yeah.
Worry about your grades at UC Merced. Don't worry about the fact that you had to choose UC Merced, because most likely you chose UC Merced, for example, because you had diversity considerations. You had to live at home. You had to work during college. You were the first in your family to go to college in the US. Like, there are usually other factors that led to that decision that add to your application, add context. So that's going to be the way that I debunk that fear.
I think I think that would definitely make a lot of students feel a lot better, just knowing that, hey, like it doesn't really come down to where you go. It's kind of,
it's what you do with it.
Well. Yeah, exactly. And I think for a lot of students, it's definitely going to make them feel a lot better about, just the overall, their mentality going into applying to law school. Speaking of that, I'm sure you've been aware of the fact that in the past application cycle, a lot of students have, there's been a increase in the number of applications in the past cycle, and it's expected to have the same for this upcoming cycle. What would you say to students who are kind of applying in this upcoming cycle and expecting that same kind of trend as the previous cycle?
Well, first, check me on this, but I'm pretty sure that almost exactly a year ago, I sat on this podcast or on this with Steve, and I said, this is going to be a crazy admission cycle.
Yeah.
So here we are a year later. My first reaction to people applying now is the same as it was to people applying last year. If this is when you want to go to law school, this is when you apply, and don't worry about anybody else and just worry about yourself. But there are several things that made this past cycle especially competitive. One of them was everyone had time to study for the LSAT, and everyone was terrified about employment prospects coming out of school, and people were losing their jobs and looking for career changes. That just created this overwhelming ball of energy toward law school. And some of that energy is still there, not all of it. And there will be some overlap because some schools were oversubscribed this year, or some people who were not happy with their results because it was such a competitive cycle will be reapplying this year, or will still be in the bucket of applicants this year. For example, at Boston College, where they're begging people to wait and come next year. And that will happen at other schools as well. So I would say, if this is when you want to go to law school, you move forward, you just do it in a way that you're really prepared for what's in front of you. You apply relatively early in the cycle. I used to say as early as possible, but people took it so literally, like you had to apply September 1, and that's not the point. The point is you want to apply September, October, ideally, with that October LSAT ideally being the last score that you would submit with. But if it flies a little bit past that, it's not the end of the world. But ideally, that's one thing you can do to prepare yourself. You can really prepare for the LSAT the first time around, one and done with the LSAT. You should have all your recommendations, your application materials kind of ready over the summer. This will probably morph into things you'll ask me next about when you apply to law school. But if you are prepared and you know what you're getting yourself into, and you also hedge your bets on schools, you cannot make decisions about where you think you'll be competitive for law school based on statistics from 2 years ago. You really have to look at current year statistics, which is hard to get, hard to get accurately. Reddit is only so good, right? So so you do need to apply maybe to a few more safety schools, a few more mid-range schools, especially if you're hoping to be competitive for scholarship. So those are some things you can do to kind of prepare for a competitive admission cycle.
Kind of tagging along on that. I know for myself with law school, their data being so transparent and you can see their statistics, their class profile, it makes it a lot easier for students to kind of compare themselves and how they rank amongst the current class that is already been admitted. What is your advice on kind of swaying students away from focusing on those numbers and kind of just focusing on their application and kind of figuring out what to do if, let's say your LSAT score is 3-4 points below their median and, that's their dream school?
So the numbers are a guide, and the numbers are not everything. They're a tool. They're not everything. Here's the thing. you have to remember, if you're a little bit low on one side, but you're a little bit high on the other, that balance is there aren't that many people at that law school have exactly the median LSAT and GPA, right? You have
Yeah.
to remember that there's give up and down. The way when things become really unlikely to work out in your favor is when you're well below the 25th percentile on both LSAT and GPA. Then it's probably not the right school, right?
Hmm.
You need something in range, something above range. That it's all about balance. But those things are great tools for shortening a school's list, especially for people who aren't so T14 focused and they don't really know where to apply, and they have maybe a few states or cities they'd be willing to go to, and they don't really know the difference between Loyola Chicago and Chicago Kent. And
Yeah.
you start to look at like where some of those things to gauge whether it's a reasonable place for you to apply. But you don't not apply to a school because your LSAT is 3 points lower than the median.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, and that's a well stated answer, because I know for myself personally, like I sometimes get too focused on looking at those class profiles and trying to see how I rank, and kind of determining in my head my chances of getting in just alone on those two numbers, forgetting the fact that there's other parts to the application that can really significantly change those the probability and the chances of you getting admitted. And so, yeah, I think that's a well stated answer, and that definitely makes me feel a lot better. Kind of makes me feel a lot more confident applying in this next cycle, knowing that there are going to be a lot more students applying. The competition is definitely going to be a lot higher.
And LSAT scores are higher. Let's not
That
ignore
is
that.
true. Yes, that
Let's
is
not
true.
ignore that. LSAT scores have been trending higher. The 170s and up, the 174s and up are increased ridiculously. You don't trust me on this? Look at my stuff I've posted online and look at
Yeah.
the LSAT numbers they publish on how many people take the LSAT and what they've been scoring. So a 172 doesn't get you as far as it did 5 years ago. There's so many people in the 174s and up that there's not, and those people also have good grades and also have good resumes. So yeah, there's crunching happening at the top. So it's something to be
Yeah.
cognizant of.
Gotcha. I mean, that makes sense. And kind of adding on to what you were just talking about, another question I kind of had was, I know for myself, not really knowing what kind of specialized or interests I kind of have within law, like what are some things that students should start researching about the law schools they want to apply to? So what are some factors that they should start considering when they are considering which law schools to consider?
I really like this question because people don't ask it enough. I actually think it's better to go to law school with an open mind and to use law school to figure out what you're interested in. In some cases, people have a lot of experience. They've worked in IP law, like they've worked for the USPTO, they know what they're doing, right? When they go to law school. But those are very rare individuals. And if you go into law school saying, oh, I want to do entertainment law, and you go to a law school because it's known for entertainment law, and then you realize, oh, entertainment law is all contracts. This is boring. Like, I don't want to do this. And then you get to that law school, but it's really only known for that one thing. You're kind of, not in a great place. So same with if you think you want to do environmental law and you go to Vermont because it's a great place for environmental law, but not for much else for perhaps. So I would prefer people not choose a law school for an area of specialization. You gain your area of specialization as a law student through the classes that you choose to take, and through the summer opportunities that you pursue, and through your extracurricular activities. The other danger, by the way, of pigeonholing yourself into one certain area of law is, what if you graduate from law school and there's nothing in that area of law? There are people who, think all through law school they're going to do M&A work. And then we're in the middle of a recession when they graduate from law school. There's no M&A work, or whatever the example would be. But there's a ton of family law work, but you go to interview for that and your whole application is corporate law. Like, it's good to be a little bit well-rounded. It actually served me. I don't really like to share personal anecdotes from law school because I'm not a career coach. I'm an expert on one tiny little thing in the planet. That's how to get into law school, not on career outcomes. But I mean, I remember, like, I dabbled a lot in law school. I had some family law, a lot of civil rights and employment discrimination stuff on my resume. But I also, weirdly enough, like, got the best grade award for corporate law. So I had these different things. Oh, and I wrote my library article on gender in the law. And so I had this like mishmash. So whatever job interview I had something to talk about that I'd done work in. if I had only done the thing I
Mhm.
cared most about, which was separation of church and state, I would have had no job offers when I graduated. It's too niche, right? So it can be good to dabble and to explore different options.
Okay. I know you mentioned some like of the past positions you've kind of had, and for a lot of prospective law, students trying to apply to law school. Even myself, I've noticed that many legal internships kind of have a requirement. Like the first requirement they'll have on it is for you to have completed at least 1 year of law school or at least 2 years of law school. Um, what would you recommend for undergraduate students looking for legal experience in that like sense, like trying to find legal internships where most of the positions
Well,
available
you're not
are
going to find
not.
legal internships, but people right out of college often have positions as, in paralegal type work or
Mhm.
file clerk work or what have you. But it might be that like working in a law firm is not really the way to show legal experience. But if you want to
Yeah.
learn more about law, that can happen more by working in a public sector job or in
Okay.
nonprofit work or for a private company in a legal department. But um, internship, no one's going to give you a legal internship as an undergrad, but you can gain some exposure to law in other ways.
Okay. That makes sense. Because I know that was something that I've been kind of going through, and my approach now has just been to make cold calls to a lot of legal firms in the area, just asking if they need help
Mhm.
with like basic work, so like paralegal work
Yeah,
and like filing and stuff like that. Because I mean, that's one way to get your foot into the door.
sure.
Um, so okay, cool.
But just to clarify, that's if you want to explore the practice law and see what it's really like. You don't need
mm,
to have legal experience on your resume to be competitive for law school, just to be clear.
okay, yeah, yeah. Sorry, I should have reiterated that before asking that question. And kind of tying in kind of like the work experience. And I know this is not like, I know there won't be a clear answer to this, but what would you say is kind of like an ideal or good amount of working experience to have prior to applying to law school?
0 to 50 years.
Okay.
Um, Everyone comes to the law school application process at a unique place. I mean, I work with people who have medical degrees or who've been police officers or in the military for 25 years.
Mhm.
Um, it's not better or worse than someone applying right out of undergrad. It's just different. So there is no minimum requirement. I would say this, some people do, I feel some people are mistaken or optimistic in feeling that 1 year of work experience post college adds something amazing to their resume. In most cases, it really doesn't, because by the time you would be starting that job, your applications are being submitted. So you'll have it on your resume, but you'll have been there 2 months. Like it's not really meaningful to the law schools, with some exceptions like Fulbright scholars or something like that. But
Yeah.
for the most part, like a year of work experience doesn't change you. The reason to wait and take a year off after undergrad would mostly be to have your final year of grades show. So if you're trying to show an upward trend, for example, or just because you didn't have time to study for the LSAT while you were in school or what have you.
Hmm.
But generally waiting out 1 year doesn't really get you a whole heck of a lot in law school admissions, if from the law school
Okay.
admissions perspective. If later you have 1 year of work experience at a law firm and later you're applying for jobs at a law firm, having that 1 year might help you. But just talking very narrowly about getting into law school, it's 1 year of work experience doesn't really make a huge difference for you.
Okay. And this is kind of tying off of that. So I know you mentioned like students taking gap years and things like that. When do you believe that students should start considering working on their applications? Because
Well,
I know for myself,
mhm.
I kind of have been postponing it till once I have completed most of my work. So like I've waiting till I take my last LSAT next week before I start looking into that stuff and just kind of putting all my efforts into that. But I know
Well, I'm not going
that
to
answer
tell
is
you a week
very,
before the
it
LSAT to
varies.
start writing your personal statement. That would
No,
be
yeah.
silly, right? But I would say when the LSAT is over, it's time. It's really
Mhm.
time. Um, if you hopefully don't have to retake the LSAT, you want to submit your applications in September, which only gives you, the rest of June, July, and August to really take your
Yeah.
time with your materials and procure, recommendations and get your transcripts in and all that stuff, if you haven't done all that yet, I usually say the first thing people should do is send their transcripts to LSAC and get their recommendations underway, because those things have the longest lead time and you have the least amount of control over how long that they take. So those are things I would have you do first. And then from there, work on your resume, your personal statement, diversity statement, and addenda, et cetera, and have everything ready to go, Labor Day weekend, hopefully, so that when applications come out, you can start to get out the applications that are easy, and then one by one start to work on those that have additional essays, with the idea of being done by end of September. That would be plan A. Plan B would be, if you took the October LSAT, you'd be submitting everything end of October, totally fine. That would be plan B, and equally, just as fine in terms of rolling admissions. But in terms of when to start, I would say, if you haven't already, it's time. Because what you don't want to do is wait for your score, say, oh crap, now I'm applying to law school. Oh crap, I've got 3 weeks to put my stuff together. And then you're not doing your best work. I don't care what you say. You're not doing your best work on brainstorming personal statement topics and drafting your personal statement and other materials in the 3 weeks after the LSAT before you would submit applications. If your score, depending on when you take. So if you're taking the August LSAT, for example, right? And then you wait for that score, and then you're gonna throw everything together in 2 weeks and submit everything September. That's not a great plan.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Doing the rest of your application definitely does take time. And as you mentioned, there's just the time that it takes for stuff to be sent in, and letters of recommendation, asking professors to give them time as well, or whoever you're asking in that sense. I know for myself personally, I had a question in regards to the letters of recommendation and trying to figuring out who I should ask to write those letters of recommendation, because I know a lot of people that I've interacted with on a professional level, academic level, and then outside of those two, through the LSAT course as well, and kind of just trying to figure out who to pinpoint, who would be best to write those letters.
Well, I'll give a generic response because I don't know your situation well enough to counsel you specifically, but generally first choice, I know that you're still in school or finishing school, so first choice is always going to be academic letters, especially if you come from an institution that you're worried won't have a lot of street cred with the schools you're applying to. You really want your professors to write on your behalf about the quality of work you've done, how you compare to other students at the university, and what's impressed them about you, to show that you can really handle a rigorous academic environment. So that would still be my first choice for you. If you've been working well in school, depending on what you've been doing, a work letter might be helpful, but it might just repeat your resume and kind of verify, oh yeah, great kid, glad he was able to work here 10 hours a week during school, he showed up on time, blah, blah, blah. Not super helpful. So we want letters that show depth. And we don't need things that just repeat what's on your resume or verify facts on your resume. And I don't care how impressive you think the person is who's signing the letter. I care about the content of the letter.
Gotcha.
But we want to stay away from personal references, and we want to stay away from family friends.
Fair enough. So looking through just to make sure I've kind of asked some of the questions kind of in regards to the application cycle. I know for a lot of students, just the cost of law school is very intimidating. And so I know for myself, I'm kind of curious to know as to what are some factors that are key things that students add or should include in their applications that can help them gain scholarships from schools. What can help them stand out?
There's nothing you would put in your application specifically about scholarships, except in very limited cases for schools that have separate essays that they ask you for certain named scholarships, for example, with NYU. The scholarships are really given based on your credentials for admission. Scholarships are basically coupons that the law schools give you to try to recruit you. So it's about choosing schools where your numbers would be very competitive, that they will want you to attend, and they will give you coupons. That is really at its basic core. The best thing you can do, here's a little plug for LSAT Unplugged, best thing you can do to increase your scholarship potential is increase your LSAT score, because at this point your grades are what they are. So there you go. But there's nothing you would put in your application necessarily to boost scholarship potential.
Okay. And then following up on that, I noticed that some students like to negotiate once they've received offers from law schools. And my question is, how successful have some of your clients been at negotiating their acceptance offers to include scholarships?
There's two questions there, actually. One is, once you've been admitted, can you negotiate a scholarship? And the second is, can you negotiate scholarships between institutions when you're deciding where to attend? Am I understanding correctly?
Yeah, sorry.
So there are kind of two answers to that. I mean, people are successful in both situations, but as I always say to people, this is not the reason to work with an admission consultant, is to negotiate scholarships. Effective scholarship negotiation happens in very limited circumstances, and the schools are on to it. Okay, there are schools that flat out say, we will not negotiate this amount, right? So if that's one of your top choices and they've given you more money than anyone else, how is it you're going to negotiate? Some people just feel like they're always going to negotiate. Like, I had one client this year who must have asked the same school, no matter how many times I told them not to, 3 times. Well, can you renegotiate this? They didn't have a competing offer from anywhere. So it's kind of dumb. He's not kind of dumb, but it's kind of dumb to the schools, right?
Yeah.
It's worth a shot, I guess. But there are some very limited circumstances where you might be ready to deposit at 2 schools that are somewhat competitors to each other, and the cost of attendance is much higher at one than the other. And you could write a letter to that school and say, you know, my cost of attendance at this school is X, my cost of attendance at your school is Y. Can anything be done to meet in the middle? Because if it could, I would absolutely submit my deposit only to this school, right? You can try it. That can be effective depending on the circumstances, but it is not a universal experience. People negotiate scholarships. Sometimes schools will come up little bits, and sometimes even after second deposit deadline, schools will come up little bits to make sure you don't leave them for a wait list or something. But for the most part, I think that scholarship negotiation gets a lot of good press, and it's clickbait, but it's not the main thing. It's not how you get the big dollars. You get the big dollars from choosing the right schools to apply to where you'll be competitive for scholarships in the first place, and knowing which schools give scholarships.
Okay, yeah, I think that makes sense.
One other thing, there are also some early decision programs that, although binding, come with scholarships, and that can be part of your strategy when applying as well.
Yeah, that's kind of one of my follow-up questions was applying through the early decision program, because some schools do offer a scholarship and some schools don't offer it, but it also could increase your chances of getting into that school, because I mean, as some of these schools are utilizing rolling admissions, they're trying to, fill up their seats. So generally, your probably chances of getting into the school are higher earlier into the year.
Well, I think if you look at the statistics, it's actually the acceptance rates for early decision at many schools are actually smaller because so many people try to apply to huge reach schools under early decision programs. So the percentage of people who get in is smaller, but the percentage of qualified people who get in is probably higher. Not that schools release that data so much, but what I would say is, if a school has a binding early decision program without a scholarship, then that's a way to get in sometimes to a school that's a little bit above your pay grade. If a school has a scholarship, they're looking for people to steal from the next school up. Do you know what I mean? They're looking to steal the top people and get them to come to their school. So if a binding early decision program, you're thinking, oh, it would be a huge reach school and a full ride, awesome. That's not really how it works. It's either one or the other. If you're applying to a binding program with a scholarship, you're making the decision, I would go here because of the scholarship.
Gotcha. Okay. So what are some, I'm trying to think of how to word this. When do you believe it's appropriate for students to apply applying under the binding early decision program?
That's an easy answer. If you know absolutely there's no other law school you'd rather attend, no matter what happened on planet Earth, then you apply binding to that law school.
Gotcha.
I've seen it too many times that people apply binding and then they get in and later they think about, oh crap, that's $300,000 of loans, and they panic.
Yeah.
So you apply binding if you know you'd be perfectly happy paying full price and going to that city, that location, no matter what, no matter where else you got in, no matter where else gave you scholarship money. Kind of a big
Okay.
deal,
Yeah.
not to be taken
Yeah, that
lightly.
is. Yeah, no, it is.
I
I've been
saw
kind
your
of
pulse kind of
contemplating.
go up. I saw you get a little nervous.
Just because I live very close to UCI Law,
Yeah,
and so that has been one of the schools that I've been thinking of.
great
Just
school.
because, I mean, the
Mhm.
cost is a huge impact. As to this kind of ties in one of the questions I'd asked earlier in regards to what are some things that students should research when applying to law school. Is cost is a very big impact on deciding which law schools to attend, and
Should.
to be able to reduce at least a fraction of that, without any scholarships is already kind of, for some students can be very can make them more likely to want to apply there and hope to get into one of those schools closer to their, where they don't have to be paying for housing and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Because I do know, like, LMU Law is, right in downtown LA, and the cost of living is very high.
Mhm.
And I know that's the case for a lot of law schools in California specifically, not to mention across the nation. Before I get into any other questions, I do see that there is someone in the call that was listening in. Do you have any questions you would want to ask, Anne?
Not to put anyone on the spot, but okay.
I just thought I would give them a second if they wanted to ask any questions.
Um, Hello, how are you guys?
Hi.
Hi, thank
Good.
you so much for sharing all this information. This is very helpful. I guess my only question is, what if you only have one school that you're trying to apply to, that you have no other option,
Mhm.
family-wise, and what types of tips and tricks can you give to stand out above the rest? Because if it
Yeah.
is a high admission pool and you only have one school to go to, what would make you stand out?
I would say in your case, Claudia, to um, reach out to the admissions office. Let them know your situation and that this is the only school that you are applying to and that you really do hope to be competitive, and um, make sure they know who you are, not in an obnoxious way, obviously, but in a way that like they're keeping an eye out for you a little bit. But you can also tell them a little bit about yourself, and if the LSAT range or GPA range is a concern, you can talk with them about that. Ask, what are some, assuming it's a regional law school close to home or a certain program that's part-time or what have you, given your situation, you can talk to them about that. Especially regional law schools they're very personal, and they're very accustomed to that. So I might start there for you. It's not something I would recommend, like for those of you who are listening later who are applying to like Columbia Law School, want to call and chat with them. Don't do that. But if you're applying to local schools, for example, like I've had clients who really the only option for them was, for example, like University of South Carolina. I said to them, we'll go meet them. This is obviously before COVID. Now we do it other ways, but hopefully back to normal soon. And meet them, make sure they know who you are, be on their radar, ask them like, here's where I'm looking at LSAT, here's what I'm looking at with GPA, here's why this program is such a good fit for me. And let them guide you and spoon feed you a little bit through the process.
Great, thank you so much. That's helpful.
You're
It's
welcome.
just I think I love having family and work, and it really just ties you to one specific city, and you're very limited in options into schools that you apply to. And of course, there's a large application pool, so you're really fighting with people that are essentially looking into a full-time. And
Don't worry about anybody else, just worry about yourself.
Great.
Yeah, don't worry
Thank
about
you.
who else is out there ever with anything. There's always gonna be someone faster with a nicer car, better shoes. Look the other way, focus on you. Law school is the same.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And one additional question, as far as extracurriculars, what types of things, based on my situation, would you recommend people that are not non-traditional, I would say?
I never believe in packaging. I don't believe in rushing out and loading up your resume 3 months before you apply to law school. You are who you are. And if you're someone who's been, your main involvement for the last few years has been, taking care of your family, or, the most volunteering you've been able to do is with the PTA, or working part-time and raising a family, like don't start throwing stuff on your resume because you feel insufficient. You've been doing plenty.
Okay. Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, awesome. And kind of tying into, applying only to one school. I know this is a question a lot of students don't want to think about, but it is something that does happen. What would you suggest for students that have been either rejected or waitlisted at all the schools that they have applied to? I know that letters of continued interest are one option, but I know another option is taking a gap year. And I feel like some students aren't prepared and aware of what they should do during that gap year to kind of improve themselves and get themselves, a better chance in the next cycle.
I'd like to just change the phrasing on my answer so that it doesn't just apply to traditional applicants. And instead of gap year, let's call it a reapplication year. Okay. Because this has been a pretty ubiquitous experience this year. I'm hearing from a lot of people aren't happy where they got in, and now this year they want to work with me, and what do I do better and differently this year? And we go over everything that I did last year and tell me how I can improve it. And did I apply to the right schools? And people want to make sure they do it right. And so the first thing you need to do is really look at yourself honestly, take the rose-colored glasses off and really look honestly. Did I choose the right schools to apply to? How do my application materials look? Were my letters of recommendation strong endorsements? Are there experiences I could add to my resume? How will I add experiences to write a new or different or better personal statement? Some things may not change, right? Your resume is not going to change a ton. Your diversity statement's probably not going to change at all, right? But your personal statement can morph and grow. You can add letters of rec. You can retake the LSAT. You might have an additional year of grades. You might have finished a graduate degree. You might have gotten a promotion. Like there could be other things. But really, I think it comes down to taking a good hard look at where you chose to apply. I think the biggest mistake people make in this is they shoot too high and they're very T14 or bust mentality. And look, I have lots of people. We started this this recording talking about clients I have who've gotten into Harvard. I'm not anti T14 law school, but what I am is not a snob either. I'm not an elitist. As I mentioned earlier, like I feel my life is perfectly amazing having gone to University of Miami. My husband went to a law school that most people on the West Coast have never heard of, California Western, but he's an equity partner in a firm with 6 offices in California. I'm not someone who believes there's only one way to accomplish this goal. And I often think if people are so fixated on T14 or not going to law school or T10 or not going to law school, they don't really want to be lawyers. They want a sweatshirt that has a name on it. And there's nuance to that, right? Like the certain job they want, they are more likely to get at T14, what have you. And I give that credit and I don't debunk that, but I also feel that's not everyone applying to law school, but there's so much out in the world talking about T14 that doesn't apply to people like Claudia who called in, right? And those messages, those rules have nothing to do with her. Her goal is whatever her local regional law school is, and that's awesome. And there are a lot of applicants like that, and they're less vocal on the internet. So I would say I've totally taken this question and like run with it. So forgive me.
No, go for it. No, it's good.
I think that people often choose to apply to the wrong law schools. And so the first thing you're reapplying is consider, did you apply to the right schools for you? Do you need to take the LSAT again? Did you give it everything you could? Did you apply early in the cycle? Did you ask the right people for recommendations? Is your personal statement actually good? Or did your mom just say it was good? Really think about these things and be willing to look at yourself with a tough lens. It's okay and great to reapply to the same schools a second time. Happens all the time. People don't get in one year, they get another year. Happens all the time. You're not blacklisted unless you did something really weird or dumb or had some horrible interaction with the law school, which is very rare. That's so rare. So I would say just take a long hard look at yourself and regroup, see what holes you need to fill and move forward. Make good decisions.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer because I know, a lot of people talk about, applying for the first time. A lot of people don't really talk about, okay, what happens during that cycle that you're waiting, and then what happens at the end of the cycle if, you weren't satisfied with what you got and you thought you could do a lot better. So I feel like a lot of people are kind of lost because they're expecting to, be attending law school by the end of,
But that's life. Like life does not often, haven't we all learned in the last year and a half, life does not always go as we think it will go. Like, haven't we learned that? That's such a great lesson. I have kids in high school and their lives have just been imploded, right? And you think about one of them is an athlete who didn't get to do her sport. She's trying to get into D1 schools and she didn't get to play her sport. Like, this is completely up in it. Like, my other daughter had significant mental health issues because of quarantine. Like, life gets all effed up, and so we need to know how to respond when things don't go our way. And sometimes that first thing with people that doesn't go their way is they don't get into the law schools they wanted to get into. But I think the lesson that the whole planet has learned in the last year and a half is that that's okay. We can regroup. We can find another way, another option, another solution. We'll get through it. We have to be patient. We have to use our time wisely, right? Focus on what matters. Like, we have all these lessons that apply equally from COVID to, a law school admission cycle not going the way we would have wanted.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I think that for a lot of students, I think that kind of gives them clarity, as to figuring out, they need to really reevaluate what they have done, reevaluate their application, and action steps for before the next cycle, to better their chances.
And I think, to be honest, we might also have people realize, gosh, I applied to law school because of COVID and I didn't know what else to do. And maybe I don't really want to go to law school. And that's totally 100% okay.
I think another question I have is in regards to, you finished applying, you've already applied. During that waiting time, that between the time that you've applied and waiting for those results, what are some things that like students should, do maybe, or
read a book, go on vacation, spend time with their friends and family. No one wants to hear that. I would say talk to lawyers. Talk to as many lawyers as you can talk to, not about getting them to write you letters of recommendation, but find out what the heck they do, how they spend their time, what they like about their jobs, if they don't, what they like about their lives and what they don't, what they wish they did, what done differently, how they wish they'd chosen a law school, what they liked about their law school, what they didn't. And don't just talk to one or two, because your chances of getting the ornery one who graduated in 1963 is like pretty high. But really, I love how you guys now say that I graduated from law school in the late 1900s. That makes me feel awesome. But you know what I mean? Like, talk to people who've gone to law school at different eras, different times, have different experiences of things they've done with their law degrees. Use that time so you're prepared to make good decisions. And it's also networking.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely a must nowadays. I feel like a lot of people kind of don't focus on networking, keep trying to apply, and then they're disappointed when they're not seeing the results, or seeing positions pop up or seeing interviews pop up. So yeah,
okay.
I think that might be it. I'm not sure if any Claudia, do you have any more questions for Anne tonight?
No, I don't. Thank you so much for your insight. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. And just so that people know, you can go to my website at lawschoolexpert.com. I do have a contact form there, and I'm happy to answer questions. I answer every question on my Instagram at Anne Levine. I'm sorry, no, it's not at Anne Levine. It's at Law School Expert. I answer all questions there, and also on TikTok. So I do respond to comments, and I like to use your questions for videos and information that will help others as well. So feel free to reach out to me there. Thanks for having me, and thanks for your thoughtful questions.
Thank you so much for taking the time today to kind of speak with us. I definitely know people that are going to be watching this recording are definitely going to have greater insight applying this upcoming cycle and for the years to come.
I look forward to hearing from everyone, and good luck with your cycle.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.